All right, everybody. First off, I'd like to thank Sands and Rob Lee for putting together this great summit. It's really amazing, and it gives us a nice outlet to talk about threat hunting, which is our favorite way of finding the enemy. In our talk today, we're talking about casting a big net, hunting at scale. And we believe that in terms of taking your intrusion detection and response capabilities to the next level, you really have to be able to do this. You have to have the capability to reach out, collect from all of your hosts, and analyze that data very quickly. And by that, we mean, within 8 hours. So a lot of people are able to collect that data and pull back RAM and pull back registry and all those forensics artifacts, but it becomes very difficult to analyze that, and then you have to store all those things. So that's what we're going to touch on with our talk today. A little bit about myself. I'm Paul Jaramillo. You can catch me ranting on Twitter and giving my obnoxious opinions quite frequently as DFIR janitor. I'm a principal consultant with CrowdStrike, and I've spent about 15 years defending targeted industries, targeted companies. I'm also a father of 2 small children, so I'm not ashamed to admit that I like to sleep. It's kind of my favorite thing these days. I'm also a big sports ball fan, for those of you that hate sports.
Hey everybody, I'm Reed Cochran. So I'm a senior consultant with CrowdStrike, been there for about 1.5 years. So previously I was with Ernst & Young, which we're going to hear some great guys from that organization talk about this afternoon. Also, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to tell 300 people at the same time that I CrossFit. And also, in my free time, I dabble with some PC gaming.
Okay, so what you'll see with our presentation is a little bit of overlap, and that's great to see because a lot of us have similar beliefs on what threat hunting is. So we're going to go over the essentials and what our approach is. And then for the practitioners in the room, we're definitely going to go over how to do this and walk you through an example hunt. So I think you guys are going to enjoy that. So to kick things off, the obligatory what hunting is not. So hunting is not new, and I love that BAM talked about this. I also believe, like BAM, that hunting has existed for quite a while, at least since the 90s, but probably further back than that. Ever since there's been a rich data set, so maybe that data set was your NSM sensor, full PCAP, NetFlow, or really verbose logging, that kind of gave you the data set to go ahead and hunt beyond just an alert. And of course, it's not alert driven. So that's where the intrusion detection analyst in the late 90s failed, because he was just clearing alerts and not really digging into it. And I kind of view threat hunting as you're just doing your job. That's what you should be doing. Eyes on glass and just clearing alerts serves a function, but you're not going to find anything new that way typically. And of course, threat hunting is not a tool or product. Obviously, sales thinks that it's a product that they can push onto you. And it's really what hunting is it's a person applying a process using their brain. The tool is really secondary. That's just helping you handle the large data sets. In regards to standardization, obviously from all the talks here, there's no standard in terms of what hunting is. But I happen to think that that's a good thing. If we all standardize the way that we hunted, what does that do in terms of the adversary? It makes it so much easier for him to avoid you if everybody's doing things the same way. It's also not a silver bullet, and everybody should be on the same page here when talking with your C-levels and your executives, that none of these new things like threat intel and threat hunting and the new buzzwords, they're not silver bullets, and you definitely don't want to sacrifice other parts of your security program to pursue a new shiny object. You still need to do old school patches and logging and build a defensible network. You still have to do that. It's very critical. So this is something on top of what you're already doing. So what is hunting? So I can tell you that CISOs, and this kind of goes along with what Ben put up here earlier, CISOs might think that hunting is this over-militaristic fantasy where you're a digital warrior with matrix camouflage. So we all know that's not what it is. But what it is answering that ultimate DFIR question. So am I compromised today? It has to be proactive. And then in terms of how it fits into models. I thought Rob Emley, or Rob 2.0 as we like to call him, did a great presentation with SANS that you guys should check out. It's in their archive about his active defense lifecycle and where hunting fits in there with how you're building your security program. And of course, we have the obligatory assumption of breach. Everybody should be doing this. I don't think anybody in here is going to say 100% my network is not breached today and bet their job on it. And then finally, one concept that I really, really like, and I'm not sure if he originated this, but I picked up this term from Hank Crumpton's Art of Intelligence. I highly recommend that book. It's a great thing. It's not cyber per se, but it has a lot of good things in there. And he used this term, exploiting your ignorance, as a way to describe how to recruit a successful intelligence officer. So the ones that were successful were the ones that knew that they didn't know things and spent time trying to explore their ignorance. So what does that mean for hunting? Really high level. We'll get more into the weeds on this later, but you're going to look for your data sources. Where can you find things? So you have to identify where that data is going to come from. Baseline the behaviors, and everybody tells you to do this. It's not easy, it just takes time. This is a long effort to baseline what's happening on your network. Look for anomalies, and then you have to turn that into a detection. And I think that was something that Heather talked about in her talk. The output of your hunts, if they're successful, should be a new detection going forward, so you don't have to do this over and over again. So then we get to what hunting really is. And it's sitting at a computer for a long time, bleeding your eyes out, drinking coffee or Red Bull. In terms of approaches, we have a couple different ways that we're bucketing this. So the classic one is objective-driven, where you set up a specific objective. That might be to assess all of your domain controllers. So maybe a hunt is, I'm going to pull RAM from all of my domain controllers and analyze that and make sure that they're clean and they're all given a clean bill of health. The next approach, and I think another speaker mentioned this earlier, was intelligence-driven. So as new intelligence comes into your organization, whether it's open source, a blog, a threat, something that you've learned by monitoring the adversary, there's going to be new indicators or new data that you can use to go ahead and apply to start hunting within your organization. And I think most companies are doing this today in somewhat of a fashion. Finally, anomaly-driven is kind of the purest form of hunting. That means you don't really have an objective or anything to start off of. You're just going out there looking for what isn't normal. Frequency of how you do hunting is largely a reflection of your resources. So I think it's really, really common for people to do ad hoc hunting. As a CERT guy or a SOC guy, you might spend a few hours a day just looking through logs and looking for random stuff, and that's great. That's what you should be doing. But it's not going to be the best approach in the long term. That may be the only approach you can do if you just don't have the resources to do it. Project-based is another great way to tackle this, and that might be throughout the year you may have 3 or 4 different hunting projects that you do, and you're able to dedicate real resources, have a project manager. And a great example of this is maybe a new mergers and acquisitions. So you're bringing in a new company, a project may be, hey, let's go hunt that environment before we connect them up to our network. Great example there. And then lastly, the continuous dedicated threat hunting team. So with that, that's going to be a well-staffed organization that can afford to task a couple people to do this, which, that's kind of the top 20% of maturity of companies that might be in that space, and hopefully we can grow that over time as companies realize that threat hunting is very important to detections. A quick word on the different types of techniques. So I think everybody's seen these before, and your brain really operates this way, but you just don't categorize it in these terms. So when you look for things, obviously least frequency of occurrence, so the things that are rare, so startup items that maybe are on those few hosts, but are different than the ones that are on all of your hosts, and I think somebody touched on that in one of their presentations earlier. Variance, so standard deviation, so it's not just stuff that's rare, but things that are outside of the normal and not necessarily low or a count. A good example of that would be network flowing out of your data. How many times have you read about a breach and thought to yourself, why did that company not detect 30 gig of data leaving their network. So variance is a good way to do that. If you're sampling how much data is going out of your network and you see a spike, that would be variance. First seen on network and host is always great. I think I had a conversation here actually with somebody about just hunting new stuff. So every day if you get a report and you look at what's new and then dive into that, that's a great way to find evil in your network. Sampling is a technique that you just look for data that you normally collect. So I think a lot of people in their corporate networks have an area of their business that's kind of off limits. Maybe that's your ERP system or something critical for your manufacturing process, financial, something maybe where they don't let the security team put their agent on. So sampling would be going out there and doing like a one-time collection and pulling in that new data set just to hunt that area and raise your assurance that that area is not compromised. And lastly, temporal or timing. Once you've been able to baseline your environment, just think of this as that spark line. So you're looking at things over time and things that deviate from that normal timing. So maybe at midnight, you're expecting to see backups run and it spikes up. So something that doesn't match that pattern, but you really have to baseline before you can get into timing. So anybody that's a fan of Silicon Valley will recognize original Jared. I'm going to use his awesome SWOT diagram here. So who should be hunting? If you're not strong in these 4 areas, I don't recommend you get into hunting. You really need to go back to home base and knock these out first. So you need to have an IR process with at least one person dedicated to IR, network visibility and host visibility, and logging. You really need that. That's critical, so definitely get that knocked out first. In terms of weaknesses, like why would you be hunting? It's to compensate for weaknesses. So if you're weak on prevention or detecting things early, if your dwell time is pretty long, hunting can help you get there and close that gap. In terms of experience, it can also help your SOC cert guys getting more experience running through the process of analyzing data and looking for compromise. So it's definitely there to help grow them. And budget is kind of twofold. Hunting doesn't have to cost any money. It can just be time, and you have to get approval for that time, but it's not like you have to buy an expensive tool to go hunting. And also, if you happen to find something, if you find a big compromise, that tends to open up the budget, the purse strings a little bit. So, threats in terms of why we're doing this is because we have these threats against our network. These are the standard 4 buckets that we tend to put things in. I'm just curious if anybody has something else that's threatening their network that's not in these 4 buckets. Is anybody dealing with something on a daily basis that's not one of those 4? Okay. So the what's that? Oh yeah, so that's a great one. So she said non-malicious insiders. So the people that actually don't know what they're doing and just accidentally email all of your financial results out to their personal Gmail account. Another one that I've seen that doesn't fall into these buckets is just kind of the random target of opportunity hacker. So he's not really associated with organized crime. He's just out there trolling around and says, oh, you put out WordPress unpatched, I'm going to own you guys. And that can actually be just as bad because those people don't have anything to lose. They don't think anything of just destroying your data. Similar to the hacktivists. In terms of opportunities, these are all the things that you're going for. Your outputs essentially from hunting. So for the business, you want to avoid loss, clearly. Risk assurance, by hunting over time regularly, you're raising your assurance level that you're more secure. It's definitely something that's concrete that you can show the C-suite that we're doing things and we're being proactive about it. And of course, it's improving your detection and response skills along the lines of experience for your SOC cert and enrichment for those guys. So if they're eyes on glass all day, it's nice to take them off of that to let them do some hunting and break up the monotony of just watching the sim. So outputs, as security professionals, a lot of the times we get knocked for not giving the business or leadership concrete, tangible outputs. So that's something that needs to come out of your hunt. A report, a debrief, and really building new detections. That's key. And And then another thing that I think BAM touched on as well is increasing that business intelligence. It's not just about the threat, but the more you know about your business, the better you are and the better you can defend it. So at this point, I'm gonna transition to Reed, and he's gonna be talking a little bit about the threat detection framework.
So over the course of the last few days, we've talked about a number of different frameworks of what is hunting, but one thing we wanted to touch on was how this actually fits in your regular operations. How do you actually do this? So for our top row, we have our knowns, where you have our use case library. These are our alerts. These are the stuff that we're detecting that we already have feeding into our process. In the hunt lifecycle, we're attempting to tackle our unknowns, so the stuff that we might not have a detection existing for. So as far as hunting, so we're going to start out with our goal or our mission creation. Then we're going to plan, how are we going to accomplish that? Then we're going to go about collecting data. We're going to analyze that data, and then ultimately debrief on the results. If we find something during analysis, then we're going to kick up our IR process and really dive deeper into what we found. Also, during our debrief, as you go through multiple hunts and you get better at conducting operations, you want that to feed and improve your use case library. Can your hunt be turned into a detection or an alert? Can you improve the fidelity of your current detections? So those are some of the outcomes that we'd like to see from as you mature in your hunting operations and as you get better at it. It would hopefully turn from something that you do once or twice in an ad hoc manner to an actual alert that you can take action on without the individual collection. So I apologize for unreadable text, so what does this look like? What are some of the questions you should be asking yourself as you go through this process? So for goal creation, so what are you currently collecting? What can you collect? How much data would be manageable for you to analyze in what you've defined as your hunt? For mission planning, how are you going to collect that data? Do you need some different tool sets? And how long do you expect this collection to take? Do you regularly have people drop off your network for months at a time? You need to plan that into your data collection. Collection is ultimately where the rubber meets the road and you use your tools to collect your data. From an analysis environment, what is my analysis environment? Is the data that I'm collecting, is it in a format that I can analyze from my infrastructure? And then during my debrief, I want to look at, okay, do I have any findings? Do I have any lessons learned? Do I need to switch my tool set? Are there better ways I can go about doing my next set of operations? And then ultimately, can this be turned into an alert later on? So one example of a hunt might be, I want to understand what programs have established persistence in my environment. So for my planning, I'm going to use PSExec, CrowdResponse, and an OpenShare to collect data. For my collection, I'm going to have cabinet XML outputs from CrowdResponse, and I'm planning to ingest that into Splunk as a post-processed CSV. From analysis, I've got some pre-baked Splunk queries to look at least frequency and some other suspicious items, as well as I have my analyst knowledge from knowing my environment to look for other indicators of strange. During my debrief, I might find 10 new binaries to do some additional analysis on, maybe do some more triage on, and maybe, depending on how big your environment is, 200 plus machines with some commodity malware. So, as I mentioned, we have a tool that we publish for free called CrowdResponse. So this is written by Robin Keir on our team, and it comes with two components. The first is CrowdResponse.exe, so this is our Windows-only console application, and we also package it up with CRConvert. So in case you don't like XML, I don't think anybody likes XML, from a human readable perspective, you can convert that into a comma-separated, tab-separated, or even just a HTML file when you're looking at a machine. For deployment, you have a few different options. So if you want to, you can do a targeted command line entry where you just grab one module or one very specific piece of information, or you can also feed an external configuration into CrowdResponse. So if you want to collect enough data to triage a single machine, you can do so. As far as deployment goes, so you have a few different options. Now we do want to have a fair warning here. There's no one solution that fits every organization. Sometimes you might have different tools for your patch management, software deployment. These are a few things that we've seen some of our clients do when deploying the official CrowdResponse toolset. So one option is PSExec. If you're going to go down this route individually, we strongly recommend you check out Mike Pilkington's post on the SANS blog about protecting your admin credentials. when using PSExec. Long story short, basically you need to authenticate to the IPC dollar share first before you actually use PSExec. We also found from a friend of a friend somebody that put together a PowerShell tool that will deploy CrowdResponse, run it, collect the data, and then bring it back to your local machine. These slides will be made available after the con, so if you want to check that out, strongly recommend you check it out. You can also, if you want to do a larger breadth of information, you can also deploy with group policy or SCCM. Also, we want to touch on, from a planning perspective, our collection analysis platform. So we prefer Splunk. Whatever you want, whatever fits your needs, you can use. So if that's set, alt, cut, grep, unique, that works just as well if your data is in the right format. But since we might be dealing with collections from hundreds of thousands of hosts, we prefer a larger environment that can scale as needed. So one thing we wanted to touch on was not just saying, oh yeah, go hunt your network, go do all the things. We want to share some of our lessons learned from us doing this on a regular basis. So the first is a frictionless deployment. So you have to be flexible for how you're going to collect. Do you need to ship data through a content filter or a proxy? Do you have to write it to an open share? If you want to do a targeted or a broad collection, does your toolset have the flexibility to do that? We also want to look at persistence versus self-cleaning. So do you have some nosy users that look and see, oh, that's a strange binary, I'm gonna delete it, or I suddenly saw my CPU spike up, so therefore I'm gonna kill our collection tools. We also recommend establishing a centralized intake server. So rather than one-off, like remote desktoping into a machine, running your tool set, waiting for it to finish, then collecting it back, you want to be able to kick this off on hundreds or maybe thousands of machines at once and collect it into your analysis environment without much involvement. As a forewarning for having that centralized environment, large collections can create absolute havoc from your analysis environment. So just be prepared to adjust if needed. So if you collect from your main NAS share and you've got a directory listing of a few million files, just be forewarned that it's going to take time for your analysis environment to catch up and actually process all that information. For us, so we create separate indexes as logical separators for each of our engagements or our clients, but you can use this to separate your hunts. Ultimately, IOPS reigns supreme. So we're going to show you in our demo video where we actually process the full results from about 5 different hosts. It only takes about 20 seconds on a VM on my laptop. But when you're dealing with large numbers of collections, it's the disk read writes that are ultimately going to speed up your processing. And then if you want to do this by yourselves with our free tools, we recommend looking at opening up some shares to write out the results from your ad hoc collections or even a larger deployment. So while this talk isn't meant to talk about the artifacts that we're going to be looking at, we do need to set some background for what CrowdResponse can collect and how we're going to use this data to hunt. So the first module that we're going to talk about is the files. So this is very basic file system metadata. This comes from your MFT, your master file table, or your FAT table. And you can kind of expect to see MACE or MACB timestamps. So this is going to be your modified, access, created, or entry changed, depending on which language you prefer. So one example that we can use that we actually include in our pre-baked configuration when you download CrowdResponse is I want to look at all executables sitting in the Windows directory and recursively go through that. So that's just the example of the command line that you would use in your config, or if you wanted to, just run CrowdResponse from the command line and collect that. The registry. So these are data files on Windows systems called hives. They contain key value pairs, and you have multiple hives for your system or your users. These are a treasure trove of data, from user assist to most recently used to Shrim Cache to your services. This is a ton of data that you can use to hunt and ultimately gain some insight into your machines. We provide 2 functions within CrowdResponse to address this. The first is regdump. So this is going to dump out the key value pairs and just give you some very basic information. The second tool that we package with CrowdResponse is regfile. So when we see a full path to a file in the registry, we're actually going to go and look at the file system data for that entry. So not just okay, is this still sitting on disk, or do I need to really worry about this? Regfile is going to go through and do that for you. Also, we'd like to introduce tasks. So while unfortunately we didn't drop the update prior to the conference, we are going to be releasing a new version of CrowdResponse. So we are introducing with that a new module. So this is the Windows tasks. While this isn't a new artifact or super fancy, we did want to touch on this and how it is a new piece of functionality for our free tool set. So this new module is going to parse out both the task scheduler 1.0 and 1.2, so both on your XP and Vista and above collections. When we parse this data, we're going to grab the task name, the application that it's executing, the command line parameters, and just the working directory that that would execute in addition to some more information. So as a refresh, this is yet another persistence method that somebody could use to maintain access to a system. If you're talking about older systems, this could also be used for privilege escalation. So if you're on Server 2003, you could actually elevate to system level privileges via scheduled tasks. So these are found in a few locations, and ultimately you can invoke this normally via scheduled tasks or the add command. As far as running this from a collection perspective, all you have to do is include @tasks in your command line, so it's pretty straightforward. With this update, we do want to talk on some of the new changes for CrowdResponse to some of your old and favorite modules, since I know everyone here has used the tool, right? You guys are supposed to laugh. So the first piece is the malware module. So previously, this was limited to sticky keys detection, which we're going to touch on that in a little bit. But now, it's also going to include an option to detect DL hijacking. So for this, we're going to look for DL name conflicts found in your path variable. We're going to look for name conflicts not found in the path variable. And we're also going to check service host or currently running service host processes for any name conflicts. On most systems, this is a lot of data to deal with because if you're on a 64-bit system, you might actually have DLLs sitting in both System32 and SysWow. So just be aware of that when you do start to look at this in your environment. But it can be a good set of ways to look at what might be doing some very stealthy runs in your environment. We also have a number of bug fixes and improved processing with CR Convert. Now, as a warning, if you do use the previous tool set, you do need to match the current CR Convert with your new collections. So unfortunately, we don't include backwards references for our tool set. So if you do update and you do new collections, you do have to use the new parser unless you want to deal with XML.
All right. So when looking at this problem, we feel pretty strongly that the collections issue is mostly solved. I think there's a ton of tools, free tools out there for you guys to do collections. You can easily find, I would say, at least 20 tools that are great at doing this. And CrowdResponse is just one of them. But there are some problems that can come up with collections. A lot of them are really like niche issues in terms of operating systems. So maybe you don't have a way to collect on some really, really old version of Solaris or AIX. That could be a problem. OSX, there's a great tool called OSX Collector, which can help out with that. But there's still going to be these little fringe cases where you necessarily can't solve that. So for instance, if you wanted to do OSX Collector, do you actually have Casper running on all of your Macs? How would you get it there? So a lot of times in a predominantly Windows environment, the Macs are kind of one-offs that nobody manages. So definitely some challenges there. And then there's a few things that just will never solve. So hosts that go offline, director gets his laptop compromised, packs up and goes off to a conference, and you won't be able to image that or do anything for a while. Bandwidth is always a concern, especially if you're pulling back, instead of pulling back metadata, if you're pulling back entire images and memory. Network bandwidth is something you need to worry about. And then also legal. There's always these issues here where you need to make sure you have permission to do that collection. But where we want to focus is really on the analysis. Being able to do that really, really fast and at scale. So we're routinely able to collect on 50,000 hosts, 60,000 hosts for multiple customers at the same time. So it's definitely something that scales, and we think that this is the direction that the industry is heading. Being able to triage really, really fast. And to Rob's point, deep dive forensics is definitely not dead, but you want to pick and choose which ones you do the deep dive. If you're going to do a deep dive and dedicate a full day or multiple days doing forensics, you should already have a pretty solid idea that that system has something malicious on it. And some of our goals were just making it scale fast, being able to just have the ingestion and parsing happen automatically. Easy data manipulation, so if you're a command line guy, you love to be able to slice and dice that data. And then timelining. So that's one of the things that you don't, it's a little bit harder to do from the command line, but with Splunk or similar applications, it gives you a nice flash timeline at the top to be able to adjust your timeline of the data that you're looking at. So our application, we ended up doing that in Splunk to give us the speed. We've also looked at Elk as well because that's even totally free. You can do this analysis with this application in the free version of Splunk, but I would definitely recommend you guys purchase it because it's a great tool. But the output of, as Reed said, the output comes in CSV, so really any one of your SIEM products should be able to ingest CSV. So it's not like you're locked into using Splunk or any particular product. You could even use Excel. So the thing to factor in when you're doing this, though, when you're collecting from all of your endpoints, is this isn't a traditional SIEM-like collection where the data is just streaming in over time. This is going to be a very, very large burst of data, and you need to plan appropriately for that. And the app that we've put out here for free is very much LR-centric host hunting. So when you're doing hunts, obviously you're going to incorporate network and other system logs, but for right now, this one is just focused on the endpoint. It's fairly easy to do within Splunk to create your own application, so people may look at this and just use it as a reference, especially if you're already a Splunk customer, and just pull out all of our queries and build a dashboard like ours, and that's great. That's what we would want you guys to do. In terms of creating it, it's super easy, so you can do it in XML or just raw HTML. And those are goals at the bottom that we kind of solved with doing this application. And mainly for us, we already knew we could do it fast and we could pivot, but for us it was making it a repeatable workflow. So when you're bringing on a lot of junior people, having a repeatable workflow that somebody can just execute over time makes you that much faster. A quick little insight into the application. So the primary thing that you're going to be hunting with in here is module-based hunting. So each one of these modules corresponds to something within CrowdResponse. So you may hunt across directories and looking at hashes, prefetch for evidence of execution. All these modules are here. And this would be the first place that you would go to start hunting because it's very, very targeted. It gives you that sniper forensics approach where you dial in really quickly and you try to get quick wins. As opposed to the methodology-based hunting, which we've kind of based off of the kill chain to group in buckets our searches, this is going to be broader. So after you've done your module hunting, which is a little more narrow scoped, the methodology hunting is going to be broader and thus require more work. You're going to have to spend more time looking through that data to find the anomalies. We did include something that it's under the Intel tab on the application, but it's really just indicator management light. I know everybody's has the problem of trying to organize millions and millions of indicators, and I'm not really sold on that approach, but you definitely want to get your indicators as close to your analysis as possible. So we added this in here. There's several lookup tables in here that are going to look for MD5s and look for stuff related to actors and known file names, stuff like that. And you can build upon this if you want. And then if you go bigger, if you want to get the million indicators, lookup tables, I believe right now, max out at 10,000 entries. So you'd want to go with a database. And Redis is one that Splunk integrates well with, but there's plenty of others to choose if you want to scale your indicators past this. I personally like the approach of hunting with very targeted indicators instead of the kitchen sink, because you may end up wasting time that way. So now,
So we're going to switch over to a demo video.
yep, sorry about that.
All right, so before we get too far into this video, so we do want to pause it for a second, so we've skipped over an important step for this case. So we actually skipped over collection. So as I mentioned before, there's no one solution that works best for you, but we're going to cover all the steps after we've already had our collection and we have our data to work with. So, go ahead and press play.
Let's go.
So we've got our CR convert tool. So we've got our our XMLs collected from a few different machines, and we're actually going to go about converting that into a CSV format that we can actually work with on a regular basis. So you can see me messing up the command line parameters. So in this case, I'm going to look at start at XML. I'm going to put it into CSV, and I'm going to output into an out directory. So now I check it out. I've got my CSVs. I'm ready to roll and start doing analysis. So next we're going to jump into the app itself. So as we mentioned before, we do have the indicator management functionality of just for creating CSVs of your less than 10,000 indicator sets at a time to automatically search that data when we are creating our tables. So next, we're going to go back to the overview table because I did not cut the video properly. You might ask yourself, okay, what machines have I collected from? So we included a host tab just to get some very basic information about our separate hunts or our indexes and what machines are included. So this includes like host name information, version, the time we collected, the IP address that the machine had when we performed the collection, and maybe the MAC address if you're looking at some network layer stuff. So now we're going to dive into the modules. So the first one, the easy one, is files. So for each of our modules, we put together some pre-canned queries to look at your data. Now bear in mind, this is not hunting. These are some ideas to, or these are some things to give you some ideas on how to hunt your environment. These are, can you pause it? Go back. Go back to the zoom in. So I've got a few hits for some file names in here. So, I'm kind of new to this IR game. So do you guys know what m64.exe is? Anybody? Shout it out. Heard it somewhere.
Something, yeah.
So Mimikatz.
Yeah.
But wait a second. Isn't there a second component that I can use to validate Mimikatz? It's I don't know. What's that file that I could look for to validate that this actually is Mimikatz running in my environment? Nobody? Secursa.dll. So for Mimikatz, Mimikatz just doesn't run by itself, so it actually needs the Secursa to inject into LSASS and to run its code. Granted, that doesn't count when you're talking about PowerShell and some of the new versions of Mimikatz, but we're looking at the file sitting on disk here. We also have some other file name indicators for some utmm.ocx, but we'll have to look into that in a little bit. So for our first set of tables, we're looking at some node-bad file names and node-bad hashes. So okay, so I've got a hash match on the machines I collected from. We also might want to look at some very large files in case hackers are getting ready for exfil, but nothing really pops out there. We also might want to look at non-job files written in our task folder, but nothing too interesting there. So as I come down to exes and DLLs sitting in a temp directory, so I've got a mediasoft.exe, and I've also got an msi.dll. So pretty suspicious. Doing my homework, so this is actually a Deep Panda indicator of them using the Secursa malware. We have a blog post if you want to check it out and get some more information, but fortunately, we at least stumbled on this on our 5 machines, and now we are much the wiser for being able to take action on those indicator hits. So next, we're going to hit up the registry. So again, this is our our deep information that has tons of different indicators that we can look for across our machines when we collect from this one data source. So for our first item, we're going to look at the current version run key, so things that have established persistence and probably the most well-known way to do so. Pause. So wait a second. So I see service host, but I thought it was supposed to run with a dash K, and I don't know, that looks a little strange to me. Does anybody recognize those flags and what that maybe is doing? There we go. So we got, but it's service host. How do I know? It's maybe netcat or what? I don't know. I'll have to dive into it later and validate that that's the real service host, or if that's just some admin messing with me. So we also go about looking at the binaries perspective. So we also get the hash for that value, so we can check and see if that's the real service host or if somebody else's or replaced it with something else. We also do least frequency on both that as well as service DLLs. So yet another persistence method where if you have a DLL, you can establish persistence for that. We also look at which one of those files are rare on a system. So next we're going to go into the new tasks module. So picking out my index and my machines. So for this, we have a few different pre-baked queries looking at jobs. So we've got two jobs for a C. When we get back to the video, so we had two jobs for a d.bat sitting in ctemp. So I don't know. Do you guys think that's bad or kind of normal? Totally legit. Let's just roll on with it. Yeah. Okay. So if you're on an older architecture, you can just replace a few of those files with commit.ithc and get the same functionality. So whether it's the on-screen keyboard or sethc for the original sticky keys, when you're dealing with newer systems that have been patched, you have to take a few additional steps to get the same functionality. So in this case, we look for both. We look for when the debugger value is set to something other than what it should be, as well as if the original files have been replaced with something that shouldn't be there. Go ahead and hit play. So from that, I do see some replacement, and I'm probably going to want to look into that. We also have a module for Shrim Cache. So for this one, we have some pre-baked queries to look at. Is there execution in places that we shouldn't see execution? So is there things executing from the recycle bin or recycler? So again, I got my credential limiting tools and also rar.exe. A little suspicious. We also look at the files from System32 and temp. So in this case, I've got some net commands and possibly some reconnaissance that I'm going to want to look into. One thing we did want to highlight with this is the 14 seconds that I killed of your time for selecting our index and our data results. You can look through one or many or a subset of the hosts that you collect at any given time with our app, and it's really up to you to choose how you want to go about looking at your data. But we do have the functionality to look at one or many devices at one point. So with that, that's the end of our demo. So let's have a quick recap. So we have some indicator hits for Deep Panda school of malware. If you want more information on Deep Panda and their information, we've got some great articles on the CrowdStrike blog. We also see a credential dumper, memcats in this case. We've got persistence for netcat listener. We've also got the sticky keys debugger set for command.exe for the on-screen keyboard. We also have some Shrim Cache evidence of some possible reconnaissance and maybe somebody getting ready for exfiltration. So these are just some of the pre-canned queries that we had before actually generating this data. So there's much, much more in it. If you want to take a look, feel free to hit us up after the presentation, and we might be able to share what else we have in our data set. So with that, we'd like to close out. So again, we've talked about how we define hunting and what that looks like from your operations. We talked about doing collections with CrowdResponse, our tool set, as well as getting ready to do some analysis with it. So with that, we'd like to open up to any questions you guys might have. Yes. So the Splunk app is going to be published on our GitHub page after the conference. And the question was, is this free or is it paid for? Yep.
When you're doing something like frequency analysis, especially in like auto runs like you showed, do you have a good way to further refine that data to turn it into alerts, or is that something you prefer to look at in dashboard form?
So that's something we prefer to look at dashboards for. So for us, this was meant to be the intro to hunting. So how do you start the operations? What are some stuff you can look for? As you get more mature and you actually start collecting auto runs information on a regular basis, that's when it could be refined into your alerts. So if you establish your known good in your whitelist and you say, okay, anything that deviates from this for new additions, I'm going to bash it up against some other sources and then alert if it stands out or if it doesn't match on one of my other sets. So as of right now, as the intro, we just want to look at some tables and get the very basics for data. But as you get more mature and you get used to seeing the same things, you can then automate that out and turn it into alerts.
All right, big round of applause for these guys.